Captain Arlen Torv sat in the command chair of the colony ship Beacon, which was about as comfortable as a metal spike shoved through his spine. It creaked under the weight of his authority and his ever-expanding gut, both of which he wished were lighter. The bridge hummed with a symphony of impending doom, alarms wailing, panels flickering, and the occasional spark of rebellion from the circuits. "I love the smell of malfunctioning life support in the morning," Arlen muttered, scratching at the stubble on his chin as he surveyed his crew. They were the finest the remnants of humanity could offer, which was like saying they were the least lethal of a group of serial killers. First Officer Sophie Vex, a woman whose mouth could shame a sailor and whose attitude could curdle milk, was hunched over her console. "Captain, life support's hanging by a thread, but hey, at least we're not dead yet, right? That's the spirit," Arlen replied, forcing a grin that felt more like a grimace. "Can we patch it with duct tape and good intentions until we find something less explosive?" Sophie snorted. "Duct tape, yes, good intentions. We ran out of those a few light years back." The rest of the crew shuffled about like zombies at a disco, trying to keep the ship from going to hell in a handbasket. There was Engineer Jax, a giant of a man whose intelligence was only matched by his disdain for authority. He was currently head-deep in a panel, muttering something about stupid wires and cheap space junk. "Jax, how's it going?" Arlen asked. Jax emerged, wiping grease from his hands. "Well, Captain, if we were any more screwed, we'd have to charge for it, but I think I can keep her limping along for a bit longer." "Limping's good. Limping means alive," Arlen said, though alive wasn't what it used to be, not since the war left the Interplanetary highway looking like the galaxy's worst traffic accident. In the wake of the war, they had become the proud owners of a path filled with more debris than a junkyard. Navigating it was like threading a needle with a wrecking ball, and yet here they were, trying to carve out a future from the remains. A crackle of static came over the comms. "Captain, you might want to take a look at this," called out Tessa, the ship's sensor operator and eternal pessimist. She had the uncanny ability to find the worst possible outcome in any situation and make you believe it was inevitable. Arlen sighed. "What now, Tessa? Did we find another asteroid about to end our miserable existence?" "Worse," she replied. "We found a ship." "A ship?" Arlen raised an eyebrow. "Out here, must be some poor bastard even unluckier than us." "Unlucky doesn't cover it, Captain. This one's derelict. No life signs, no power, just floating out there like a ghost." Arlen felt a mix of curiosity and dread. Ships didn't go derelict without a reason, and that reason was usually the kind that came with teeth and a bad attitude. But salvage was salvage, and they were desperate for anything that could keep them from being the next ghost ship. "All right," he said, "let's see what it's got." God helps those who help themselves, and I hear he charges by the hour. They maneuvered Beacon closer to the derelict, an ancient relic that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated straight lines. It was covered in scorch marks and dents, each telling a story of violence and survival. "Looks like it's been through a blender," Sophie remarked, peering at the screen. "Yeah, and the blender lost," Jax added, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Prepare a boarding party," Arlen ordered. "Let's see what secrets this old rust bucket is hiding." As they suited up, the atmosphere was tense with the promise of danger and reward. Spacesuits secured, they made their way to the airlock, a shoddy piece of hardware that had seen better days and was about as trustworthy as a politician's promise. "Just remember," Arlen said, "we're not here to make friends. If it's dead, loot it. If it's not, make it dead, then loot it." Sophie chuckled. "Captain, you always know how to inspire." They crossed the void between the ships, boots clanging on metal as they entered the derelict. The interior was a museum of horrors, walls stained with ancient blood, debris scattered like a child's messy playroom. "Home sweet home," Jax muttered, stepping over what might have once been a very unhappy crew member. They moved cautiously, flashlights cutting through the darkness like accusations. The air was stale, a reminder that no one had breathed it for far too long. It was the kind of place where you expected to find something lurking in every shadow, just waiting to jump out and ruin your day. "Captain," Tessa's voice crackled over the comms, "you might want to see this." They found her in what was left of the ship's bridge, staring at a device that hummed with a life of its own. It was sleek, alien, and entirely out of place, like finding a Ferrari in a junkyard. "Well, that's not supposed to be here," Sophie said, eyeing it with suspicion. Arlen approached, feeling a mix of awe and apprehension. "What do you make of it, Jax?" The engineer squinted at it, scratching his chin. "Looks like some kind of tech we've never seen before. Could be valuable. Could also explode and take us with it." "Always the optimist," Arlen said dryly. "Hey, I call it like I see it," Jax replied. "And right now I see something that's either our ticket out of this mess or the last nail in our coffin. Captain, we should bring it back to Beacon. Analyze it and see if it's worth anything," Sophie suggested, ever the pragmatist. Arlen nodded. "All right, let's wrap it up and get out of here." As they maneuvered the device back to their ship, Arlen couldn't shake the feeling that they had just bitten off more than they could chew. But then again, that was just another day in the life of Captain Arlen Torv. When they finally returned to the beacon, the mood was cautiously optimistic. They had something, and in their line of work, something was a hell of a lot better than nothing. Back on the bridge, Arlen watched as Jax began examining the device. Okay, so what's the verdict? Jax took a deep breath. Well, Captain, this might just be the most advanced piece of tech I've ever seen, or the worst bomb. Nothing like a bit of mystery to keep things interesting, Sophie remarked. I've got a feeling our luck's about to change, Arlen said, more to convince himself than anyone else. Not sure if that's a good thing or bad. The crew settled into a tense wait, the kind that made you feel like the universe was holding its breath, waiting to see if they'd survive this latest gamble. As the device hummed quietly, Arlen couldn't help but wonder if they'd just found their salvation or their doom. Either way, it promised to be one hell of a ride, and with the universe watching, they were in it for the long haul. Well, Arlen said, glancing at his crew, let's see what kind of mess we've gotten ourselves into this time. And with that, the beacon drifted on, carrying its crew and their newfound treasure into the great unknown, for better or worse. Well, here we are, Arlen muttered, standing in the cluttered engine room of the beacon, which was about as inviting as a dentist's waiting room. A ticking time bomb, and that's just my cholesterol. Jax, already elbow-deep in alien tech, snorted. Don't worry, Captain. If it blows, at least you won't have to worry about that anymore. Arlen rolled his eyes, but a grin tugged at the corners of his mouth. Good to know that in the face of potential annihilation, you've got your priorities straight. Sophie sauntered in, her expression a cocktail of irritation and morbid curiosity. So, what have we got? A press button, receive doom kind of deal. Nothing so simple, said a new voice. Enter engineer Lissa Verdon, the latest addition to what Arlen liked to call his ship of fools. Lissa was sharp, both in intellect and tongue, capable of taking apart a quantum drive with her eyes closed, which was about as useful as a waterproof toaster right now. Lissa brushed a strand of hair from her face, frowning at the device. It's a doozy. Looks like it's designed to interfere with alien tech. Like an EMP, but specifically nasty to our tentacled neighbors. That's fantastic, Arlen said, sarcasm wrapping around his words like a cozy blanket. Let's just hope the neighbors don't come knocking. Sophie's eyes narrowed, skepticism radiating off her. And what's the catch? There's always a catch. Lissa folded her arms, not breaking eye contact with the device. The catch is we don't know what else it might do. It could fry circuits, ignite the ship's atmosphere, or summon a horde of space locusts. It's basically a box of bad surprises. Arlen rubbed his temples. So, using it might save us from getting vaporized by aliens, but it might also turn us into human-shaped barbecue. Pretty much, Jax confirmed, patting the device like it was a cat with trust issues. Captain, Tessa's voice crackled over the intercom, her tone a shade of concern. I'm picking up multiple ships on an intercept course. Looks like our luck's run out. Great, just great, Arlen muttered, striding over to the nearest console. Like flies on a rotten sandwich. Friendly? Sophie asked, already knowing the answer. If by friendly you mean they'll probably kill us last, Tessa replied dryly. Then sure, Arlen looked at his crew, the finest ragtag bunch this side of a black hole. All right, folks, we need a plan. Do we risk using this thing or pray for a miracle from the universe? Spoiler, the universe hates us. Lissa adjusted her glasses, considering. We could try to send out a signal, a warning might deter them. Yeah, Jack said, scratching his chin. Or it might just piss them off more. We've got eyes maybe, Tessa added, her voice resigned. If they're hostile, they'll be on us faster than a debt collector. The room fell silent, each crew member lost in a sea of their own thoughts, most involving various creative curses directed at the universe. Despite the tension, Arlen couldn't help but chuckle. Well, if we're going out, we might as well do it as a footnote in someone else's history. Sophie shook her head, a ghost of a smile on her lips. You always know how to lift the mood, Captain. So, the device? Lissa pressed, her gaze darting between the crew and their ticking mystery. Arlen took a deep breath, the kind that felt like it should be used for diving off cliffs or into ill-advised marriages. Let's do it. Fire it up, and let's pray to whatever deity's listening that this doesn't end with us decorating the cosmos in a fine mist of failure. Lissa nodded, fingers dancing over the console with the grace of a pianist who was really hoping the audience wouldn't notice the mistakes. All right, interfacing now. Point of no return, folks, Sophie murmured, crossing her arms. Nice knowing you all, assuming this goes sideways. Jax leaned back, watching with a mix of curiosity and horror. If this works, drinks are on me. If it doesn't, well, I won't be here to regret it. The device hummed to life, a soft glow emanating from its surface, and the ship shuddered around them. It was the kind of hum that spoke of power and possibilities, the sort that could either save them or seal their doom. Captain, Tessa's voice came again, this time tinged with awe. It looks like the alien ships are backing off. A sigh of relief swept through the room like a plague of optimism. Arlen let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. I'll be damned. Maybe the universe doesn't hate us entirely. Don't get cocky, Sophie warned. This could still be a trap, and if it is, Arlen replied, we'll just have to spring it with style. The crew laughed, a sound that was more nervous than joyful, but laughter nonetheless. It was amazing how impending doom could bring people together. Lissa, still focused on the device, finally allowed herself a small smile. Looks like we've got a bit of breathing room. Breathing room, Jax echoed, but for how long? What's next? Are we the new kids on the block with the biggest stick, or did we just paint a target on our backs? Arlen nodded, thoughtful. We need to figure out what else this thing can do. We're playing with fire and I'd rather not get burned. The crew dispersed, everyone with tasks to do, problems to solve, or worries to nurse like particularly needy houseplants. Arlen stayed behind, staring at the device, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like an unwelcome coat. Sophie, he called, turning to his first officer. What do you think? Have we opened Pandora's box here? She shrugged, her expression unreadable. Could be, or maybe we've just stolen someone else's Pandora's box. Either way, we've got to be ready. Ready for what? Anything, she replied, the word hanging between them like a challenge. Arlen nodded, staring at the now dormant device as if it might start speaking in tongues. All right then, let's get ready. They were a small ship in a vast universe, armed with a device powerful enough to change their fate or end them completely. The stakes were high, the risks higher, but they had each other and a mad plan that might just work. Well, Arlen said, clapping his hands together, let's see what kind of trouble we can get into next. And with that, the crew of the Beacon set to work, preparing for whatever the universe decided to throw at them next. Because in the end, it wasn't about the destination. It was about surviving the journey with a smile, a middle finger to the odds, and maybe, just maybe, a story worth telling. Arlen Torv sat at the head of the round table, or more accurately, the round patch of floor where they'd propped up a few crates. He rubbed his temples as if trying to massage his brain into giving up the secret to eternal survival. The beacon was still intact for now, but they were like a mouse in a room full of hungry cats. The alien coalition was out there, somewhere, demanding the surrender of their newfound toy, and Arlen had no intention of handing it over. Call it stubbornness, call it pride, or just plain stupidity. Either way, they needed a plan. Sophie Vex, ever the beacon of cheer, leaned back in her chair, or rather, a crate that looked like it had seen better centuries. So, Captain, what's the plan? Or are we just going to wait until they get bored and decide to blow us to bits for fun? We need to buy time, Arlen replied, glancing at Lissa, who was fiddling with the device. Lissa, any chance you can whip up something in that brain of yours to keep us from becoming space debris? Lissa snorted, pushing her glasses up her nose. I'd need a miracle, or a rare element that we just happened to not have on board. Of course, Jax chimed in, sarcasm dripping like oil from a rusty engine. Because it would be too easy otherwise. What's this rare element? Sophie asked, her voice a blend of curiosity and annoyance. Trinium, Lissa replied, as if everyone should know it. It's what makes this thing tick. Without it, it's just a glorified paperweight, Arlen sighed. And let me guess, the nearest supply is in a star system crawling with hostiles. Got it in one, Captain. Lissa nodded, a grin playing at the corners of her mouth. Fantastic, Arlen muttered. Just another day in paradise. All right, Sophie said, crossing her arms. So we just waltz in, grab what we need, and hope we don't piss off the locals. How hard can it be? Jax chuckled, his voice a low rumble. You say that now, but give it 5 minutes. You'll be wishing for the sweet release of death. Charming, Sophie quipped. Really, you should consider motivational speaking. Arlen stood up, clapping his hands to gain everyone's attention. Okay, folks, let's get moving. We need a plan to slip into that system, grab the trinium, and get out without turning this ship into a floating scrap pile. The crew nodded, and with a collective sense of purpose, or at least mutual resignation, they dispersed to their stations. Arlen watched them go, feeling a familiar mix of pride and dread. Leading this crew was like herding cats through a minefield, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Hours later, the beacon edged closer to the star system like a burglar tiptoeing through the wrong neighborhood. Arlen sat in the command chair, fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the armrest. Tessa, their navigator and one hell of a pessimist, was at the controls. Captain, she said, sounding more bored than worried, we're entering the system. Sensors show a lot of activity. Might as well paint a bullseye on our hull. Great, Arlen replied. Just stay sharp. We need to slip past without making a scene. Sophie leaned over, studying the readouts. More like trying to sneak past a pack of rabid dogs with a stake tied to our asses. Hey, Jax interjected over the comms from the engine room. I'd say we're more like a stale sandwich. Less appealing, but still a target if they're hungry enough. The ship shuddered slightly as Lissa joined them on the bridge. I've got the device primed. Just say when and we'll light this candle. Let's hope it doesn't get to that, Arlen said, though he knew they'd probably be setting off fireworks sooner rather than later. The beacon slipped deeper into the system, dodging patrols with the nimbleness of a drunk staggering through traffic. Arlen's nerves were fraying, each close call adding another gray hair to his already thinning head. Tessa's voice was a tightrope of tension. We're approaching the asteroid belt. The trinium should be there, assuming we don't get blasted to bits first. That's the spirit, Arlen said dryly. Keep it up, and we'll have a motivational poster in no time. Jax's voice crackled over the intercom again. Captain, we're going to need a distraction if we're going to get near those rocks without being noticed. Suggestions? Arlen asked, hoping someone had a better idea than pray and hope. Lissa cleared her throat. We could use the device. Give them something to chew on while we slip in and out. Arlen considered it. And if it goes wrong, then we're already dead, Sophie shrugged. Might as well go out with a bang. Captain, Tessa interrupted. Incoming ships. Looks like they're not planning to roll out the welcome mat. All right, Arlen decided. Do it, Lissa. Give them something to think about. Lissa nodded, her fingers moving deftly over the controls. The device hummed to life again, and the beacon shivered as if it shared the crew's anxiety. Here goes nothing, Arlen murmured, watching the view screen as the device sent out its disruptive pulse. The effect was immediate. The pursuing ships faltered, their systems scrambling like a toddler in a maze. The beacon slipped past, diving into the asteroid field like a fugitive with a death wish. Okay, Arlen said, his voice tight. Now let's find that trinium and get the hell out of here. The next few minutes were a blur of navigation and sensor sweeps, the crew working together with the precision of a well-oiled machine, if that machine had a few screws loose and a tendency to backfire. There, Tessa exclaimed, pointing to a blip on the screen. That's our target. All right, Arlen said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. Jax, you and Lissa get down there and grab what we need, make it fast. On it, Captain, Jax replied, already moving. As Jax and Lissa suited up, Arlen watched the screen, tension coiling in his stomach like a snake ready to strike. This was the kind of situation that made him long for the simple days of worrying about his cholesterol. Jax's voice came over the comms, gruff and reassuring. We're in position, Captain, starting extraction. Make it quick, Arlen urged, glancing nervously at the blips on the radar that indicated enemy ships slowly regaining their bearings. We don't have much time. The minutes dragged by, each second feeling like an eternity. Arlen forced himself to breathe in and out, trying to ignore the pounding of his heart. This was the kind of tension that could drive a man to drink or to scream. Either option seemed appealing. Got it, Lissa's voice came over the comms, triumphant. We've got the trinium, heading back now. Move fast, Arlen said, relief and urgency battling in his tone. We need to get out of here before they decide to turn us into space dust. The beacon thrummed with energy as Jax and Lissa returned, the precious trinium secured in their grasp. Arlen wasted no time, ordering Tessa to get them moving, away from the asteroids and back into open space. Let's hope our luck holds, Sophie muttered, her eyes glued to the screen as the ship maneuvered through the field. Luck, Jax's voice crackled, amused. I thought we were relying on sheer stubbornness and a touch of insanity. Same difference, Sophie replied with a smirk. The beacon pulled away, leaving the chaos behind. For now, they were safe, at least until the next crisis loomed on the horizon. Arlen leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at his limbs. It was another day survived, another gamble one, but he knew better than to relax. In space, there were no guarantees, and the universe was a fickle mistress. All right, team, he said, his voice carrying a mix of weariness and determination. We've got the trinium. Now let's get back to figuring out what this device can really do. Lissa nodded, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. It might just buy us the edge we need, Captain. Arlen allowed himself a small, grim smile. Let's hope so, because we're going to need every advantage we can get. As the beacon slipped back into the void, the crew settled into the familiar routine of survival, equal parts ingenuity, determination, and a willingness to laugh in the face of doom. They were still flying, still fighting, and as long as they drew breath, they'd keep pushing forward. Because in the end, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about making sure that if they did go down, they'd go down swinging. The beacon lumbered through space like a clumsy giant trying to tiptoe through a field of landmines. Captain Arlen Torv, ever the picture of dwindling patience and rising cholesterol, leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if hoping the answer to their predicament might be written there in invisible ink. I swear, this ship's falling apart faster than my marriage, he muttered, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. Sophie Vex, perched nearby with the grace of a bored cat, arched an eyebrow. You were married once, Arlen replied with a wry smile, but she got tired of me talking about spaceship maintenance during dinner. Go figure, Sophie quipped, rolling her eyes but smiling nonetheless. Jax's voice crackled over the intercom, his usual sarcasm laced with a hint of urgency. Captain, we've got a problem down here, and by problem I mean something's on fire. Isn't it always? Arlen sighed, standing up and brushing imaginary dust from his uniform. Right, I'll be down in a minute. Try not to blow us all to hell in the meantime. Promises, promises, Jax retorted, the sound of clanging metal punctuating his words. Sophie followed Arlen out of the bridge, the two of them walking with the hurried pace of people who had long since made peace with the concept of impending doom. The engine room was a mess, as usual. Wires hung like jungle vines, and the smell of burning electronics filled the air, like an old lover, familiar and unwelcome. Jax was knee-deep in machinery, looking like a man trying to defuse a bomb with a sandwich. "What's the damage?" Arlen asked, surveying the chaos. Jax wiped a hand across his forehead, leaving a smear of grease. "Oh, you know, just the usual. A bit of smoke, a bit of fire. Another day in paradise. You're a ray of sunshine, Jax," Sophie said, crouching down to inspect the damage. "When you're not actively trying to depress the rest of us. Hey, if I wanted to depress you, I'd start reading my poetry," Jax shot back, grinning from ear to ear. "Focus, people," Arlen said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Jax, can we fix this without resorting to duct tape and hope?" Jax shrugged. "Probably. But if not, I think we could make a pretty decent raft out of what's left." Arlen managed a chuckle, despite himself. "All right, Sophie, can you help him out? I'll see if Lissa's got any good news about the trinium." Sophie saluted mockingly. "Aye aye, Captain. Let's see if we can keep this tin can flying for another day." Leaving the engine room in their capable, if somewhat snarky hands, Arlen made his way to the lab where Lissa was tinkering with the trinium like a kid with a new toy. Her face was a mask of concentration, glasses perched on her nose as she worked. "How's it coming along?" Arlen asked, leaning against the doorframe. Lissa didn't look up. "It's like trying to teach a cat to juggle, frustrating but occasionally rewarding. Any chance of it exploding?" he asked, half joking, half serious. She finally met his gaze, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Not unless you've got a secret hatred for us all that you're planning to act on." "Not today," he said, crossing his arms. "Any other surprises I should know about?" "Just the usual. The trinium's stable for now, but we need to get this thing operational, or we'll be sitting ducks the next time those hostiles come sniffing around." "Always a pleasure, Lissa," Arlen said, turning to leave. "Keep me updated, and try not to blow us up." She waved him off, already lost in her work again. Arlen was headed back to the bridge when the comms crackled to life. "Captain, we've got company," Tessa's voice came through, a rare note of urgency cutting through her usual monotone. He picked up the pace, heart rate accelerating at the prospect of yet another crisis. On the bridge, the view screen was lit up with a cluster of blips, ships moving towards them with the kind of determination that suggested less interested in a friendly chat and more in a hostile takeover. "Looks like they want to invite us to a party," Sophie said, joining him at the console. "And we're the piñata. Any chance we can talk our way out of this?" Arlen asked, though he already knew the answer. "Not unless you speak fluent trigger-happy alien," Tessa replied, her fingers dancing over the controls. Arlen grimaced. "All right, let's see if we can lose them in one of these asteroid fields." "Jax, how's it looking down there?" Jax's voice came back, a buzzing mix of static and sarcasm. "Oh, peachy, just tell me when you want me to start praying." "You and me both, buddy," Arlen muttered, turning his attention back to the problem at hand. The beacon banked hard, diving into the mess of space rocks like a reluctant swimmer into a cold pool. Arlen clung to his chair as the ship shuddered, the sound of creaking metal a constant reminder of their precarious situation. "Any bright ideas?" he asked, though he wasn't expecting miracles. "We could always let them board and offer them a cup of tea," Sophie suggested, grinning despite the tension. "Only if you want to poison them," Arlen replied, eyes locked on the screen. The enemy ships were converging, their intentions clear enough to give Arlen heartburn. "Tessa, try to plot us a course through this mess. Jack, see if you can give us a bit more power. Lissa, what's the status on that EMP device?" Lissa's response was quick and efficient. "It's operational, but it's not a silver bullet. It might buy us some time, but it won't hold them off forever. Time's all we need," Arlen said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "All right, on my mark, let's give them something to chew on." The seconds ticked by with painful slowness, each heartbeat a thunderclap in the tense silence of the bridge. Then, at just the right moment, Arlen gave the order. "Now, Lissa," the ship shuddered as the EMP pulse rippled outwards. A flicker of hope surged through Arlen as the view screen showed the enemy ships faltering, their systems scrambling like a game of galactic twister gone horribly wrong. "Well, I'll be damned," Sophie said, watching the chaos unfold. "Looks like that miracle came through after all. Don't jinx it," Arlen warned, though he couldn't stop a small smile from tugging at the corners of his mouth. With the enemy temporarily incapacitated, the beacon slipped through the asteroid field, engines straining but holding. It was a white-knuckle ride, the kind of adrenaline rush that could only come from the very real prospect of exploding into a million tiny pieces. But somehow, against all odds, they made it through. The enemy ships were left behind, still floundering, and the crew of the beacon allowed themselves a collective sigh of relief. Nice flying, Tessa, Arlen said, clapping a hand on the navigator's shoulder. She shrugged, as nonchalant as ever. Just another day in the void. Let's not make a habit of it, Arlen replied, settling back in his chair. With the immediate threat dealt with, the crew turned their attention back to the task at hand, getting the trinium-powered device working before the universe threw them another curveball. In the lab, Lissa was already hard at work, her fingers dancing over the controls with the kind of precision that came from equal parts skill and sheer bloody-mindedness. Jax joined her, rolling up his sleeves with the air of a man ready to wrestle a problem into submission. "Let's get this thing singing," Jax said, his eyes gleaming with the challenge. Lissa nodded, a rare grin breaking through her usual seriousness. "Singing? Hell, let's make it dance." Back on the bridge, Arlen and Sophie watched the progress from the monitor, their banter a welcome distraction from the ever-present threat of doom. "Think it'll work?" Sophie asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. Arlen shrugged. "If it doesn't, we'll just blame Jax, seems fair. And if it does, then we congratulate him and pretend like we had faith all along." Sophie laughed, the sound a bomb against the tension. "You're a terrible liar, Captain." "Good thing I'm not paid to lie," Arlen replied, meeting her gaze with a steady one of his own. Meanwhile, in the engine room, Jax and Lissa were elbow-deep in wires and circuits, their focus unyielding. It was the kind of work that demanded every ounce of attention, the kind that allowed no room for error. "All right, one more adjustment," Lissa said, her brow furrowed in concentration. Jax nodded, hands steady despite the stakes. "Let's make it count." With a final tweak, the device came to life, humming with an energy that was both promising and slightly terrifying. Lissa leaned back, a satisfied look on her face. "We've done it," she said, a note of triumph in her voice. "Let's hope," Jax replied, though his grin was as wide as hers. When they returned to the bridge, their success was met with cheers and a round of backslaps that threatened to knock Arlen off his feet. "Nice work," he said, clapping Jax on the back. "Never doubted you for a second." "Sure you didn't," Jax replied, though his eyes were gleaming with pride. The beacon continued on its way, the precious trinium safely secured and their newfound device ready for action. It wasn't an easy victory, and it hadn't come without risk, but they'd pulled it off, and for the crew of the beacon, that was something worth celebrating. As they settled back into the routine of space travel, Arlen couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They were still flying, still fighting, and as long as they drew breath, they'd keep pushing forward. Because in a universe that seemed determined to test them at every turn, they had each other, and that was more than enough. The dim, flickering lights of the beacon cast long shadows that twisted and turned with the ship's movements, like ghosts from an old nightmare refusing to leave. The crew clung to their stations, trying to ignore the unsettling groans of the ship's hull. Morale had plummeted through the floor and was currently digging a nice hole into the lower decks, thanks to the recent loss of several crew members. "Well, isn't this just the cherry on top of our shit sundae?" Jax grumbled, wiping oil-streaked hands on his trousers as he surveyed the engine room, a place even the roaches were starting to evacuate. "I swear if one more thing breaks, I'm gonna start fixing stuff with duct tape and spit." "Spare us your optimism, Jax," Sophie shot back, nursing what looked like a black eye and a wounded pride. "We're not dead yet, which is more than I can say for some poor bastards on this flying death trap." "Yeah, well, give it time," Jax muttered, tightening a bolt that looked like it was trying to escape the ship entirely. He paused, glancing up at Sophie, who was valiantly trying to keep the life support system from throwing in the towel. "How you holding up?" "Like a cat on a hot tin roof with a tinier cat biting its tail," she replied, thinly veiled sarcasm coating her voice. "Any idea when we'll see the light at the end of this horribly mismanaged tunnel?" Jax shrugged, the universal sign of an engineer out of hope and out of answers. "Soon as someone finds us a miracle wrapped in trinium." Meanwhile, Arlen stood on the bridge, facing the viewscreen with the air of a man who'd seen too many bad movies and was now starring in one. The alien coalition was closing in, their ships forming a noose around the beacon. Their intentions were clear. This wasn't going to end with a friendly exchange of recipes. "Well, ain't this just a cosmic joke?" Arlen said, scrubbing a hand over his face. "All these stars, and we're the ones with a target painted on our arse." Tessa, ever the picture of calm amid chaos, looked up from her console. "Maybe they just like the way we smell. That'd be the scent of desperation and burnt wiring," Sophie chimed in as she joined them, her smirk doing little to mask the tension etched into her features. "So, what's the master plan, Captain?" Jax asked, crossing his arms and leaning against the wall like a man resigned to his fate. "Hope they got the wrong address," Arlen sighed, the weight of command pressing down like a particularly needy elephant. "We activate the device." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that comes right before a bomb goes off. Lissa, who'd been lurking at the back of the bridge with the air of someone who'd been volunteered for something unpleasant, stepped forward. "You do know what happens if this doesn't work, right?" Arlen nodded, the grim reality of their situation not lost on him. We go boom and the universe continues pretending we never existed. Ah, good. Just wanted to make sure we were clear on the stakes, Lissa replied, her tone as dry as the vacuum outside. Look, we've got no choice, Arlen said, his voice steely with resolve. Either we try this or we get ready to meet whatever afterlife we've earned. Sophie raised an eyebrow, skepticism radiating off her in waves. And you're sure this isn't just your cholesterol talking? Arlen huffed a laugh, though it lacked any real humor. I've got a lot on my mind. My arteries can take a number. With a plan, if one could call it that, set, they dispersed to their stations, each one acutely aware of the ticking clock. Jax and Lissa headed back to the lab, the device sitting there like some ancient relic of power and destruction. Time to see if we can pull a rabbit out of this hat, Jax said, tapping the side of the device with a mix of reverence and trepidation. If by rabbit you mean an explosion, then yes, Lissa replied, setting to work with a precision that belied the chaos around them. Back on the bridge, Arlen watched the enemy ships close in, their intentions clear and deadly. He couldn't help the sardonic smile that twisted his lips. They say life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, he mused aloud. Yeah. What about death? Sophie asked, her gaze fixed on the view screen. That's what happens when your plans explode in your face, Arlen replied, settling into his chair as if it might be the last time. The alien ships were almost upon them now, the view screen filled with the ominous shapes that suggested anything but peaceful intentions. The beacon lurched as another barrage hit, the lights flickering like a dying candle. Any last words? Tessa asked, her fingers still moving over the controls with the casual grace of someone who'd faced death one too many times. Yes, stay away from my poetry, Jax's voice echoed over the comms, a rare note of humor cutting through the tension. Noted, Arlen replied, giving a nod to Sophie, who activated the device. The ship shuddered as the energy pulsed through it, a ripple that spread outwards in all directions. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, bit by bit, the enemy ships began to falter, their systems overloaded by the surge. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was enough to buy them some breathing room. Looks like we've got their attention, Sophie said, watching the chaos unfold with a glint of satisfaction. Let's not waste it, Arlen replied, already plotting their next move. Tessa, see if you can find us a way out of this mess. Jax, Lissa, get ready to give that thing another kick if they get too close. The crew of the beacon worked with a focus born of desperation, their chatter laced with the kind of grim humor that had kept them going through the darkest times. Next time someone suggests a career change, remind me of this moment, Jax said, sweat beading his brow as he worked to stabilize the device. What, and give up all this excitement? Lissa replied, her hands steady even as the ship shivered with the strain. On the bridge, Arlen and Sophie shared a glance, their usual banter giving way to the weight of the moment. Think we can make it out of here? She asked, half joking, half pleading for an answer that didn't come wrapped in doom. Depends on how many miracles we got left, Arlen replied, his gaze fixed on the view screen as the alien ships continued to struggle against their own systems. Moments stretched into eternity, each second dragging its heels like a reluctant child. But finally, Tessa's voice broke the silence. I've got a route, it's risky, but it's the best we've got. Risky sounds just like our speed, Arlen said, clenching his fists as the ship turned to follow Tessa's plotted course. Let's make it count. As the beacon surged forward, engines screaming in protest, the crew braced themselves for whatever came next. It was a dance with death, a high-stakes gamble where the odds were stacked against them. Yet somehow, against all logic and reason, they were still fighting, still flying. The enemy ships lagged, their systems still caught in the throes of the EMP interference. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but it was a path nonetheless. And in the unforgiving void of space, that was more than they'd dared to hope for. Well, if this ain't a story for the ages, Sophie said, her voice a mix of relief and disbelief. Here's hoping we live long enough to tell it, Arlen replied, though the ghost of a smile softened his words. Together they navigated the treacherous path, each twist and turn a reminder of how close they were to losing everything. But there was no time for fear, no room for doubt. The beacon forged ahead, a battered survivor in a galaxy that had forgotten how to care. In that moment, with the universe pressing down and the odds stacked high, the crew of the beacon found strength in their shared struggle. It was a testament to their resilience, their stubborn refusal to go quietly into the night. Remind me to buy you all a drink if we make it out of this, Arlen said, his gaze fixed on the path ahead, determination etched into every line of his face. I'll hold you to that, Sophie replied, her tone light despite the gravity of their situation. With a final push, the beacon slipped into the relative safety of open space, the enemy left behind in a haze of confusion and malfunction. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they'd bought themselves time, a precious commodity in a world that seemed determined to snatch it away. As the crew settled into their new trajectory, the tension eased, if only by a fraction. They were bruised, battered, but unbroken. For now, that was enough. "So, what's next?" Jax asked, his voice crackling over the comms with a weariness that mirrored their collective exhaustion. "Survive," Arlen replied simply, the word heavy with the weight of everything they'd endured. "And maybe a nap," Tessa suggested, her usual calm tinged with an exhaustion that was all too real. "Yeah, a nap sounds good," Sophie agreed, leaning back in her chair with a sigh. The beacon continued on its path, the crew's laughter echoing through the corridors, a sound both defiant and hopeful. It was a reminder that even in the darkest hours, they were still standing, still fighting. And as long as they had each other, there was always a chance for something better. "Onward then," Arlen said softly, his gaze fixed on the stars that beckoned beyond. "Let's see what the universe has in store." With that, the beacon sailed forward, a testament to human stubbornness and the unyielding spirit that refused to be snuffed out. In the vast, uncaring void, they had each other, and in the end, that was all they needed. The beacon was a creaky old tub of bolts, but today she was their only hope. Arlen stared at the flickering console, a headache blossoming behind his eyes like a neon sign advertising doom. If the universe had a sense of humor, it was the kind that laughed at someone else's funeral. "All right, team," he said, managing to sound like a leader despite feeling like a man one bad day away from throwing in the towel. "We've got a plan," Jack shot back, his voice crackling over the comms with the static of barely concealed contempt. "Isn't that what you call a list of things that don't work? Optimism, Jax. Try it sometime," Arlen replied, rubbing his temples as if that might somehow massage some clarity into his muddled thoughts. "That's not optimism," Sophie chimed in, her tone sharp enough to cut through the tension like a laser scalpel. "That's just ignorance wearing a cheerleader's outfit." Arlen managed to chuckle, though it felt more like a cough. All right. Lissa, you've been awfully quiet. What have you got for us?" Lissa leaned over the device, her fingers dancing across its surface like a pianist playing a funeral dirge. "Well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is, I think I know how to activate this thing without blowing us into a million tiny bits. And the bad news?" Tessa asked, not looking up from her console where she plotted trajectories that might lead them out of this celestial garbage fire. Lissa grimaced, the expression doing nothing to soften the glint of dark humor in her eyes. "The bad news is, if I'm wrong, we're going to be inaugurated as cosmic debris. High-stakes poker, then," Arlen said, rolling his shoulders as if shedding a mantle of doubt. "Not like we've got much to lose. Except our lives," Sophie pointed out, dry as the Martian desert. "And your poetry career," Jax added, ever the supportive friend. "Wouldn't want to inflict that on the universe anyhow," Arlen replied, his smile a thin line of defiance. "Okay, let's get cracking." Feeling like a conductor guiding a symphony of chaos, Arlen relayed orders. "Jax, get the engines primed. Tessa, keep that escape route open. Lissa, do what you do best and make sure that device doesn't turn us into vapor." The crew got to work, each member focused with a determination that could have moved mountains, or at least something more impressive than their current odds. The hum of the ship's systems, punctuated by the occasional groan and creak, was a familiar backdrop to their efforts, a reminder of just how close they were to the edge. In the engine room, Jax was elbow-deep in circuits that would have made lesser engineers weep. Of course, Jax was not one to cry over spilt coolant. "You know, if this goes south, it's been a pleasure," he said, not bothering to look up from his work. "What's this sentimentality?" Lissa teased from where she was hunched over the device, her voice light despite the tension. "Or are you just trying to make peace before you inevitably break something?" "Hey, I don't break things," Jax countered, though his hands were delicately rearranging a mess of wires that looked suspiciously like they might go boom. "I just reconfigure their priorities." "Yeah, from working to not," Lissa shot back, a grin tugging at her lips despite it all. Meanwhile, back on the bridge, Arlen was keeping a close eye on the approaching alien ships. They were forming a neat little blockade, like a welcoming committee with a taste for destruction. He couldn't help but admire their thoroughness, even if it was directed at ending his miserable existence. Sophie glanced at the viewer, her expression that of someone watching a slow-motion car crash and knowing the cleanup was going to be murder. "So do we just wave the white flag, or what?" "Only if the white flag's attached to a nuke," Arlen replied, his grin more grimace than anything. "We just need to hold them off long enough." "For what?" Tessa asked, her voice calm as a pond in a hurricane. It was a skill, that calmness, and one Arlen envied in moments like these. "For Lissa to work her magic," Arlen answered, trying to inject some confidence into a sentence that felt thinner than his wallet. "And if she doesn't, then we hope reincarnation's a thing," Sophie said, her fingers dancing over the controls with a grace that belied her flippant tone. In the bowels of the ship, Lissa's fingers moved with the precision of a surgeon as she adjusted the device. Every wire, every circuit was a potential death trap. It was like defusing a bomb, except the bomb was also a highly sophisticated piece of alien tech that didn't come with a user manual. All right, I think I've got it, she said finally, stepping back with the air of someone who'd just defused a ticking time bomb, which wasn't far from the truth. The rest of the crew didn't cheer, didn't even pause to congratulate her. They were too busy ensuring their own parts of this madcap escape plan didn't fall apart like a cheap suit. But there was a shared moment, a breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding, that passed through them all. Time to roll the dice, Arlen said, nodding to Sophie. Activate the device. Sophie did, her hands steady as she pressed the button. The ship shuddered, a deep, resonant hum echoing through its corridors as the device powered up. The alien ships wavered, their systems flickering like candles in a breeze. It wasn't a knockout punch, but it was a solid jab, enough to make them pause and reconsider their life choices, or at least their current attack vectors. Looks like it works, Tessa said, relief threading her voice. For now, Arlen cautioned, though the corner of his mouth twitched up. Let's see if we can keep it that way. Always the optimist, Sophie teased, though her own relief was palpable. Someone's got to be, Arlen replied, his voice lighter than it had been in days. All right, let's get out of here. Full throttle Tessa, the engines roared, a sound like 1,000 angry lions, or at least what Arlen imagined lions would sound like if they were turned into engines. The beacon surged forward, leaving the disoriented alien ships in its wake. You know, Jack said over the comms, if we survive this, I'm taking a vacation. I'll join you, Lissa replied. Somewhere far away from alien coalitions and malfunctioning tech. Don't forget the drinks, Sophie added, her eyes on the viewscreen as the stars began to blur by. And the poetry, Arlen said, grinning. Can't forget that. The beacon raced through space, a battered, bruised testament to their resilience. The alien ships lagged behind, their systems still in disarray. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the crew dared to hope. All right, Arlen said, his voice steady as the ship surged forward. Let's see what else the universe has in store. It was a moment of triumph, a rare win in a galaxy that seemed determined to crush them at every turn. But for now, they'd take it. They'd take it and run with it because that was what they did. They survived. They endured. They fought back. As the beacon flew on, the crew allowed themselves a moment of camaraderie, a shared sense of victory that buoyed them even as the threat loomed ever-present on the horizon. They were the best humanity had left, and they weren't going down without a fight. Drinks are on me, Arlen said, his voice laced with a determination that matched the stars blazing in the viewscreen. And I'll make sure you pay up, Sophie replied, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. With a final push, they slipped into the relative safety of open space, leaving the chaos behind. It wasn't over, far from it, but they'd bought themselves precious time. Onward then, Arlen said softly, as the beacon continued its journey into the unknown. Let's see what tomorrow brings. The universe might be vast and indifferent, but as long as they had each other, and a ship that somehow kept flying, they had a fighting chance. And sometimes that was all you needed. The beacon hummed along, a decrepit metal whale in the ocean of stars, somehow still holding together despite the universe's best efforts to tear it apart. Captain Arlen Torv leaned back in his worn chair, contemplating the mess they'd narrowly escaped. His mind flicked between relief, anxiety, and the odd responsibility of feeling like the galaxy's most bedraggled babysitter. So, Jax's voice crackled over the intercom, punctuated by the sound of something clanging in the engine room. When's the part where we don't die? We're past it, Arlen replied, fiddling with a console that had the audacity to still flicker. Unless you get creative back there and decide to redefine safe. Not today, Jax grunted, his tone suggesting he was elbow-deep in wires, possibly up to something unsanctioned by any known safety protocols. Today I'm all about survival. Is that what we're calling this? Sophie chimed in, her voice dripping with enough sarcasm to drown a small planet. She was perched at her station like a cat ready to pounce on a particularly slow mouse. Because all I see is a prolonged goodbye to sanity, Arlen chuckled dryly. Aren't we all? The bridge door slid open, admitting Lissa, who was wiping grease off her hands and looking far too pleased for someone who just poked at alien tech with a metaphorical stick. That device we rigged up is still holding, Captain. Seems the aliens didn't account for our particular brand of genius. Or luck, Sophie muttered. I mean, it's not like we plan to have a temperamental piece of alien tech save our hides. Luck's just another form of skill, Arlen said, mostly to comfort himself. He had a knack for turning abject terror into misplaced confidence. And last I checked, we've got plenty of both. The alien fleet, such as it was, had decided to back off. Their ships were still visible on the edge of the viewscreen, huddled together like a gaggle of sulking schoolyard bullies who'd just been outsmarted by the nerds. They'd underestimated human desperation, a mistake they hopefully wouldn't survive to repeat. Looks like they're still thinking it over, Tessa noted, her fingers dancing over the console as she charted courses with a precision that belied the chaos outside. But I wouldn't bet on them sitting quietly for long. Maybe they're just as shocked as we are, Lissa mused, leaning against a bulkhead with the casual air of someone who just defused a bomb without knowing which wire to cut. It's not every day a ragtag human crew sends them packing. Ragtag, yes, but effective, Arlen said, gesturing expansively with a hand that somehow still held a half-eaten protein bar. Let them stew in their own juices for a bit. We deserve a breather. He wasn't sure what was next. Diplomacy wasn't exactly his strong suit. He was more shoot first, ask questions later, but the moment called for something other than a trigger finger. Maybe a holiday would do, assuming they didn't get vaporized first. So what's next, fearless leader? Sophie asked, insouciance practically rolling off her in waves. We wait until they decide to play nice, or we go out there and remind them why humanity deserves its bad reputation. Let's keep the reminding to a minimum, Arlen said, glancing at the tactical display. The alien ships hadn't moved, still caught in the aftershock from their tech hiccup, but be ready in case they don't see reason. Reason, Jax chimed in, his voice a disembodied presence over the speaker. You expect reason from beings who thought chasing us across half a galaxy was a solid plan. Optimism, Jax, Arlen replied, echoing his earlier quip, this time with a bit more sincerity. It's the last refuge of the damned. And the insane, Sophie added, her eyes on the screen as she monitored the aliens' every twitch. But if the shoe fits, let's keep the insanity productive, Arlen said, his tone somewhere between command and plea. He could feel the weight of the beacon beneath him, every groan and shudder a reminder of both its tenacity and its frailty. In the engine room, Jax was muttering to himself, a tune running through his head that matched the complex rhythms of a ship determined not to fall apart. He was a maestro of machinery, even if the orchestra occasionally decided to play its own tune. You know, Lissa began, breaking the brief silence on the bridge, if we pull this off, we'll be legends, or fugitives, probably both. Is there much difference these days? Tessa asked, not looking up from her console. Probably not, Arlen agreed. But I'd prefer the type of legends that don't end up dissected in an alien lab. Wouldn't we all? Sophie said, leaning back and crossing her arms. Guess it's our lucky day. Arlen was about to reply when the console in front of him pinged, a sound that usually meant something needed immediate attention or repairs, or both. He glanced down and frowned. Looks like we've got an incoming communication from our new friends. Friends, is that what we're calling them? Sophie asked, her eyebrows nearly reaching her hairline. Today, yes, Arlen said as he keyed the communicator. The screen flickered, then resolved into the image of an alien commander, its expression inscrutable but decidedly less hostile than before. Human vessel beacon, the alien's voice came through, harsh and guttural like gravel being chewed. We wish to discuss terms. Arlen leaned forward, every inch the captain, if by accident rather than design. Terms, I'm listening, but just so you know, we don't negotiate with bullies or dinner guests who don't bring a bottle. Sophie stifled a laugh, earning a glare from Arlen, who was trying to keep a straight face. The alien commander didn't seem to appreciate the humor, but then again, neither did Arlen's last ex. You have demonstrated resourcefulness, the commander continued, probably reading from an alien script entitled How Not to Blow Up, and we recognize the advantage you hold. We propose a ceasefire and negotiation. Arlen glanced around at his crew, who seemed to share his doubt. Negotiation, huh? What makes you think we're interested in talking after you've chased us halfway across the universe? Pragmatism, the commander replied, its tone as warm as a block of ice. Neither of us benefits from further conflict. Well, you've got that right, Arlen conceded, but understand we want guarantees. Pull another stunt like this, and I swear we'll make your technology go on strike again. Agreed, the commander said, its tone suggesting it was eager to wrap up and possibly get back to its own version of coffee. We will transmit coordinates for a neutral meeting point. Arlen nodded, though his mind was racing faster than the beacon in a meteor shower. Fine. But remember, we've got a long memory and a short temper. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in a contemplative silence that spoke volumes without saying a word. Guess that's progress, Tessa said, breaking the quiet like a rock through a window. Progress, sure, Sophie replied, tapping her fingers idly on her console. Or a prelude to more trouble. Arlen pushed back from his console, the weight of command a familiar but unwelcome pressure. Let's hope it's the former. We've seen enough of the latter. Lissa grinned, her earlier tension giving way to something that might have been hope. Time to see if we can actually get through a negotiation without someone deciding it's a good idea to shoot first. Stranger things have happened, Jax chimed in, his voice crackling with static reassurance. Yeah, like us pulling off this stunt, Arlen agreed, standing and stretching his arms. All right, people, let's get ready. We've got a peace to negotiate and a galaxy that's not going to save itself. And if it doesn't work out, Sophie asked, leaning back and watching him with the cat-like curiosity she was known for. Then we improvise, Arlen replied, a wry smile playing on his lips. Just like always, the crew prepared for the meeting, each in their own way, their resilience a testament to the stubbornness of humanity. Arlen could feel the anticipation in the air, a mix of dread and excitement that buzzed like low-grade static. As they set course for the designated coordinates, Arlen allowed himself a moment to reflect. They'd survived the unsurvivable, outwitted the unwittable, and somehow cobbled together a plan that didn't end in fiery doom. Not bad for days' work. "Okay, team," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command and the promise of future insanity. "Let's see if we can talk our way out of this one." The beacon cut through the stars, a rusted, defiant arrow in the quiver of a species that refused to bow, and as they sped toward the unknown, Arlen felt a strange sense of peace. Not because they were safe, far from it, but because they were together, riding the edge of chaos with the kind of unity only desperation could forge. Whatever tomorrow held, they'd face it head-on, with sarcasm as their shield and stubbornness as their sword. The universe might be vast and indifferent, but they'd carved out a corner for themselves, if only for a moment. And sometimes a moment was all you needed. The beacon hummed along, a creaky symphony of space junk and human stubbornness, as Captain Arlen Torv pondered the absurdity of their lives. Here they were, the last ragtag remnants of humanity, playing negotiator with an alien coalition that'd sooner see them as fertilizer than friends. It was the kind of irony that'd make even the most jaded poet weep into their whiskey. "You know, Arlen," Sophie Vex's voice cut through his thoughts like a laser through butter, "I've read more coherent ransom notes than that last transmission." Arlen chuckled, not bothering to look away from the star-speckled abyss outside the viewport. "Oh, come on, Sophie, look at it this way. At least they didn't send their terms in a dead language," she snorted. "True. I suppose we should be grateful we're not deciphering alien hieroglyphics right now." In the engine room, Jax was tinkering with something that might have been important or might have just been shiny. With him, you never could tell. "Hey, Captain," he called over the intercom. "You think these aliens use the same Google Translate we do?" Arlen grinned at the thought. "If they do, we're screwed." "The last thing we need is a galactic misunderstanding over the word surrender. Or dinner," Lissa added, appearing at his shoulder like a ghost with a sense of humor. "God forbid they think we're inviting them over for a cookout." "Right," Arlen said, leaning back in his chair. "I doubt they'd appreciate being served as the main course." With the coordinates set, the beacon was on its way to their so-called neutral meeting point, a spot in space notable only for its remarkable absence of anything. No stars, no planets, just a desolate void, perfect for peace talks or a spectacular last stand. "So," Tessa said, as if broaching the subject of a particularly awkward family reunion, "what do you think they really want?" "To not die, same as us," Arlen replied, trying not to sound as weary as he felt. "They're tired, battered, and not as invincible as they'd like to believe, just like us. Which makes them dangerous," Sophie pointed out, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm on her console. "And desperate," Lissa added, her voice carrying a hint of wry amusement. "I mean, they're negotiating with us. How low do you have to be to see us as a viable ally?" "Lower than us, apparently," Jax quipped. "Touché," Arlen said, rubbing his temples. "But let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're just misunderstood genocidal maniacs. Or maybe we are," Sophie said with a shrug. "Perspective, Captain." The beacon eventually dropped out of warp at the designated coordinates, the view outside the port full of precisely nothing. It was the kind of nothing that made existential dread seem like a fun distraction. "Well, here we are," Arlen said, not bothering to hide his lack of enthusiasm. "Middle of nowhere." "Population us, and them," Tessa added, nodding toward the blip on her screen that signaled the arrival of the alien fleet. "Looks like they showed up after all. Good for them," Sophie said dryly. "Punctuality's a virtue, even in space." The alien ships drifted into view, maintaining a respectable distance but close enough to ensure everyone knew they meant business. Their ships resembled angry insect nests, bristling with weaponry and an attitude problem. "All right, team," Arlen said, his voice filled with a confidence he didn't feel. "Let's see if we can avoid turning this into a fireworks show." The aliens hailed them, and Arlen opened the channel, hoping his poker face was up to the task. The alien commander appeared on screen, its face a mask of inscrutable calm. It was like staring into the reflection of one's own misery, but with more tentacles. "Human vessel beacon," the alien began, sounding about as thrilled to be here as Arlen felt. "We are ready to commence negotiations." "Good," Arlen said, keeping his tone light. "We were just discussing our mutual dislike for interstellar war." The alien did not smile. Arlen wasn't even sure it had the necessary facial muscles. "We are prepared to offer terms." "Offer away," Arlen said, leaning forward. "But remember, we're not in this for the real estate." "Agreed," the alien said, its tone as flat as a pancake on a diet. "We seek a cessation of hostilities and mutual exchange of technology." Arlen exchanged a look with Sophie, who merely raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think we've got anything you'd be interested in?" he asked. "Your improvisational skills are unique," the alien replied, its attempt at diplomacy as awkward as a penguin on a unicycle. "Our improvisational skills," Lissa snorted, "more like our ability to make it up as we go along. Either way," the alien continued, "we propose a sharing of knowledge, your ingenuity for our resources." Arlen mulled it over, the offer tantalizing in its simplicity. "And what kind of resources are we talking about here?" The alien's eyes, or what Arlen assumed were eyes, glinted with something akin to interest. "Trinium and other vital elements, enough to ensure your survival and growth." Arlen felt a spark of hope ignite, quickly smothered by pragmatism. "And in return, your techniques for overcoming technological limitations," the alien explained, its voice carrying a hint of grudging respect. "Your adaptability. Adapt or die," Jax muttered from the engine room, capturing the very essence of humanity's current credo. "Sounds fair," Arlen said, rubbing his chin. "But let's be clear, we're not interested in becoming your pets, nor are we in becoming yours," the alien replied, its voice surprisingly level. Sophie smirked, leaning back in her chair. "So, mutual respect. Sounds like a terrible idea." "Indeed," the alien said, almost managing a semblance of humor. "A terrible idea that may yet save us all." After the formalities were exchanged, the transmission ended, leaving the crew to process the new reality they'd just stepped into. "Well," Tessa said, breaking the silence, "that went better than expected." "Agreed," Arlen said, though he knew the real challenge lay ahead. "Now comes the hard part." "Which is?" Lissa asked, arching an eyebrow. "Making sure we don't screw it up," he replied, the weight of command settling back onto his shoulders like a leaden cloak. "We've got a chance here, a real chance to set things right, not just for us but for everyone scraping by in this broken galaxy." Jax's voice crackled over the intercom, full of familiar mischief. "Anyone else feel like we just stepped into a bad movie, more like a poorly written sitcom?" Sophie replied, earning a light chuckle from Arlen. "Either way," he said, glancing around at his crew, "we're not going to waste it. We've got colonies to rebuild, alliances to forge, and aliens to keep at arm's length," Lissa added, her smile a mix of determination and defiance. "Exactly," Arlen said, feeling something dangerously close to optimism. "Let's get to work, people. The universe isn't going to save itself." As the beacon turned away from the neutral meeting point, the crew felt a new sense of purpose infuse the ship, a purpose born of desperation and hope, of survival and ambition. They were the best humanity had to offer, even if that wasn't saying much. Arlen stood at the viewport, watching the stars streak past like the tears of forgotten gods. He was aware of the irony, but for once he didn't mind. They were headed toward the unknown, but they weren't alone, not anymore. "Captain," Sophie said, joining him at the viewport, "think we can pull this off?" He looked at her, seeing the same fire in her eyes that burned in the hearts of the entire crew. "If luck's a skill, then yeah, I think we can." She grinned, a fierce, unyielding thing. "Then let's go show the universe what humans are made of." Arlen nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of hope in equal measure. Together with his crew, he knew they'd carve out a future for humanity, a future where they weren't just survivors but thrivers. And maybe, just maybe, they'd throw in a few more punchlines along the way.